has to be cut down.
Okay. Gary, how do you feel?
We all do. Grief is part of life, unfortunately. Now, again, I'm going to sound like I'm someone who's insensitive here, but if there seems to be no other alternative, I mean, if we're going to do that, then we have to grieve for all the trees that were cut down when Wellington was made where it was, and Palmerston North, and Oamaru and Timaru and Ashburton and everywhere else. So, I mean, we do have to be slightly realistic about the march to civilization. So I say, by all means, grieve, and good on the grandmothers for grieving. But we do have to move on. I think another stand of trees would be a wonderful solution.
Speaking of the March of Civilization, the town of Greenbank, West Virginia, at the heart of America's National Radio Quiet Zone. And the National Radio Quiet Zone is where they have a big sensitive telescope looking at the universe, and they don't want electronic noise around it. And you don't see cell phones and Wi-Fi routers and broadcast antennae. And people now move there because of this. And they're not old-fashioned people. A lot of them seem reasonably well-heeled people. They're still on their computers, some of them. Is there a part of you that would really like this?
I don't think I would like it at all, actually. I like to be connected to the world. I don't think well, having said that, I do quite like the couple of weeks in the year when we go out to Karikari and there's no internet and no cell phone and no television and nothing except for an AM radio. That's quite enjoyable for a kind of a detox, digital detox for a week.
Can I ask you about that? Do you feel better? Because reckon from electrohypersensitivity, or EHS.
Yes, I am a bit sceptical about that. No, I don't feel any different when I'm out of Karikari. But I understand that there's these people who feel that the electromagnetic fields or whatever are doing something to them physically.
Yes,
and
they do. They say
I
that.
read that story and thought, goodness, they are very neurotic people. But
well, that's what the World Health Organization implies, but there's a neuroscience institute in Sweden taking them seriously and referring to it as perhaps an epidemic disease that they are the canaries in the coal mine for.
Wow. I hope that's not the case. There is no actual science around it, is there, at this point?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's interesting to be a canary at that point, but I think the Roy Morgan poll of New Zealanders, 12,000 New Zealanders, show that the stress levels are up from 57%, 57% to 67% of New Zealanders say because they're online all the time, they're more stressed, there are not enough hours in a day, so the stress levels have gone up. So it makes sense that people might get rashes, but not because they're subject to the electric signals, but because of the demands of being online and answering a smartphone every hour of the day. That makes perfect sense.
The chronic stress causing I would agree, probably. Sounds more plausible.
There's Diane, whose rash has disappeared and her hair grew back, and she can even use a computer again, but a stranger's cell phone will send bolts of pain through her head.
Does her hair fall out again at that point when she gets a phone call?
Poor Diane.
Yeah, poor Diane. But it's a town of techno refugees, and it looks like quite a modern town. They all meet for coffee, and you know.
Yeah.
And it's not like that. They wear.
I wonder what they talk about
and
when they get together. I think they talk about their rashes and how their hair's growing back and stuff.
According to, I'm persisting with this, according to a survey of dozens of studies, the biggest challenge in diagnosing EHS is that those suffering from it often exhibit what's called the nocebo effect, which you'll know about, where even the expectation of exposure to EMR, electromagnetic rays and things, can cause physiological symptoms.
Yeah, and there's so many, it's one of these syndromes, isn't it, that if they can't figure out what it is, they call it a syndrome, and it's an array of vague kind of symptoms. There's a lot of these things around now, and it can be cured usually in the world of nutrition, by going off wheat and going off dairy, and various other things that you eliminate from your diet often will eliminate the syndrome of just vague symptoms from fatigue to general unease.
But should we even be putting up with the stress that Gary talks about? Because everybody mentions how all the screens and the hubbub and the busyness of life are producing that stress.
That is true, yeah, absolutely. We need to switch off. We need to have times when we switch off.
Yeah.
So, Gary...
Tell me where that town is. My hair's dropped out over the years. I'm going back there.
Gary McCormick on the panel. Very nice to have you on, as always.
Cheers.
And Nikki Besant, thank you for coming in too, Nikki.
It's a pleasure.
Good to see you. And that's the panel. Checkpoint with John Campbell follows. Thank you, everybody.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for being with us. Tonight, how much do beneficiaries owe WINZ? Well, Checkpoint can reveal the amount is more than $400 million and climbing. One of its biggest debtors, a mother of 8 children, evicted from her Housing New Zealand home after it was found contaminated with meth, now owns WINZ more than $60,000 after spending the last 7 months in emergency accommodation. We're going to talk to the Minister, Anne Tolley, about this very big issue tonight. Is the management of this working? Also tonight, should Blenheim become Marlborough City? 4 climbers perish in 4 days on Everest. And Joseph Parker in the studio to discuss going for #1 in the world. All of that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The government will deliver more money for buying Crown land for building houses and for social housing in Thursday's budget. The Building and Housing Minister has also flagged an increasing problem with buildings failing inspections. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The government's coming under increasing pressure over housing as budget day approaches. In light of its continued insistence, there is no housing crisis. The Minister, Nick Smith, says progress is being made after a $52 million commitment to buy Crown land last year. However, he wants more money for that work to continue. And he says there's a specific problem emerging with a greater number of buildings failing inspections as new house construction ramps up. Dr Smith says that's been getting worse over the past 2 years and a balance has to be struck between building houses at pace and maintaining quality. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Social Development Minister says wiping the debt of people who have had to stay in motels for emergency accommodation would not be fair to others in the system. Community housing groups say more and more people are running up debts of tens of thousands of dollars living in emergency accommodation. The Labour Party says the government should write off that debt. The Minister, Anne Tolley, says it can be a challenge dealing with people in crisis and who might, for example, struggle to find a landlord who will have them as tenants. But she says the government is a place of last resort and will keep supporting them. She says, however, that would not mean wiping existing debt.
Well, it might be a help to these people in particular, but what about the people that have actually worked really hard and paid their debt off in the past? And how much debt do you forgive and when do you start?
Anne Tolley says while there's a time limit for a special needs grant, there's no time limit for staying in emergency accommodation. The brother of a man who was bashed to death in a motel room told the 2 killers today they had no right to take his brother's life. Bowen Wallace-Loretz and Leonard Natras-Berquist have been jailed for life with minimum non-parole periods of 11 years and 10 years and 9 months respectively. Ihia Gilman-Harris died after taking the then 17-year-olds to an Epsom motel 2 days after Christmas in 2014. Mr Gilman-Harris's brother, Hoani Harris, told the High Court in Auckland his children and grandchildren had been denied their uncle and great-uncle.
The mental image of him cowering and calling for help as he was set upon by these 2. Brother, I'm sorry for not being able to save your life. I would have, brother, if I could.
Hoani Harris also said how sorry he was that his 56-year-old brother had suffered alone. A black Labrador named Bo has been rescued by firefighters after spending 5 days stuck on a South Canterbury cliff. The fire service was called to the cliff on a rural property in the Esk Valley near St Andrews today after nearby residents heard a dog barking. A spokesman, Kevin Donaldson, says the dog, who'd been missing since Friday, had got himself stuck on a 25-metre cliff. Mr Donaldson says it's unclear how the dog got where he did.
Firefighter Rob Shiphorse was lowered down over the bank on a line, got access to the dog, who was very pleased to see him, and manufactured a harness or a sling out of some material had. Then both Rob and the dog were hauled up the small cliff up onto to the ground where the dog could be released.
Kevin Donaldson says the dog has been reunited with his owner. A diver is working to stop diesel leaking from a vessel that sunk at its moorings in the Coromandel Harbour. The Waikato Regional Council says a small amount is leaking from the fuel tanks of the 10-metre pleasure craft. It was towed into the harbour by the Coast Guard last night after it broke down nearby, but sank after it was moored to the ferry wharf near Tacoma. The council's on-scene commander, Dave Lovett, says only tiny amounts of diesel are leaking and the conditions will minimise any environmental impact.
The vessel is probably about 400 to 500 metres away from the shore, and very, very little of that is actually reaching shore. So most of it is through wind and tide it's evaporating on its way in.
Dave Lovett says the diver is blocking the breathers of the fuel tanks and the boat will then be salvaged. To sport, and the Golden State Warriors forward Draymond Green is free to play in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals tomorrow after the NBA decided not to suspend him for his kick to the groin of Oklahoma's New Zealand centre Steven Adams. Instead, the NBA has upgraded the flagrant foul and Green will be fined. Meanwhile, in today's Eastern Conference final match, the Toronto Raptors have stunned the Cleveland Cavaliers 105-99, squaring the best-of-7 series up at 2-2. Game 5 between the Raptors and Cavaliers is on Thursday. The New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker will lose his mandatory IBF title challenge if he fails to beat his next opponent, Australian Solomon Haumona. Parker earned the right to fight Briton Anthony Joshua for the IBF title when he beat Carlos Takam in an eliminator bout in Auckland at the weekend. However, that mandatory challenge is unlikely to take place before the end of the year. The fight against Haumona will be in Christchurch in July, with Haumona, the current WA Pan-Asian Boxing Association champion, a title Parker was stripped of last year after his camp refused to fight Haumona.
He brings a different game plan to what Takam had. He brings power, and his power is dangerous. So it's every fight that we have is a risky fight, but we have to be at our best. I think the fighter that you underestimate or the fighter that you look past is the fighter that will get to you.
Joseph Parker, and that's the news.
Frosty receptions.
There was a little bit of hostility, even through the joy of the rescue attempt being successful.
Cheating the system.
They received the directive do not board, and then they manipulated his biographic details to allow the passenger to board the aircraft and fly to New Zealand.
Thawing diplomatic relations.
I think President Obama here is trying very artfully to thread the needle of deepening relations with Vietnam.
Breaking the barriers on Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Espino, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the death of coral reefs and how it's preventing fish from avoiding predators. And after 10, New Zealand-born meteorologist Agnieszka Fritzkowska, who once spent 34 months on end in Antarctica and is now training to become a pilot. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mainly fine. However, brief rain this evening and isolated showers tomorrow. For the rest of the North Island, showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail from later today, easing tomorrow evening. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, showers with isolated squally thunderstorms and hail from this evening, easing tomorrow afternoon and clearing in Marlborough and much of Nelson by evening. Westland, a few showers in the north, spreading to most places tomorrow. Canterbury, cloud increasing and scattered rain developing this evening, clearing tomorrow. Otago and Southland, apart from Stewart Island, scattered rain developing about the south coast tomorrow morning and spreading north later. For Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's almost 9 minutes past 5.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Last night on Checkpoint, we spoke to a woman paying $1,100 a week for emergency housing. Like all people we've spoken to over the past week and a half who are in emergency housing, they simply can't afford it. The very basic WINS-approved motel rooms, lodges and boarding houses they're staying in are charged up to $1,700 a week. I'm holding here the WINS paperwork for one. Takanini, WINS approved, a unit, small, incredibly basic, $1,650 a week. So, to stay in this emergency accommodation, people borrow money from WINS. Tonight we can reveal beneficiaries owe WINS a total, this is from everything, of $417 million. We're going to discuss that with Social Development Minister Anne Tolley in a moment. But first, a woman who owes, well, she tells us, $74,000 to WINS. Alistair Russell from the Auckland Action Against Poverty group told us about her last night. He told us she'd been evicted from a Housing New Zealand house with pea contamination. She'd needed emergency accommodation, so she's borrowing money from WINS and staying in a motel in Mangere with her 8 children. Today, I met her to confirm the amount. How much money do you owe WINS?
$75,000.
And how have you racked most of that debt up?
And housing, emergency housing, which is my motel that I stay at.
So since you were chucked out of your Housing New Zealand house, what sort of weekly rents have you been paying for emergency housing?
The most I've paid is $17.90.
$17.90 a week. Now that's a very small part of the interview I recorded with Jay, that's what we're calling her. We've decided not to run more of that interview for fear of identifying her. A short time ago we spoke to Carl Crafer from the Ministry of Social Development. He does know her case. He told me Jay has a history of staying at homes that present with P contamination. He said that's why Housing New Zealand evicted her. He said her emergency accommodation debt was $60,000, not $74,000. That is disputed between them, but we can say it's somewhere in a range of $60,000 to $75,000. Now, Carl Crafer says, and we accept this, it's a very complex situation and requires delicate management. These are complex stories. Jay, for example, was born into SIFS care. She spent her young life in foster homes. She is damaged and she is vulnerable. She also has 8 children who are still with her. These are immensely difficult situations. But the fact does remain that whatever has happened, Jay is in emergency housing with 8 children and she's running up debt to WINS at the rate of more than $1,000 a week. The total debt, as we said at the top of the program, owed to the Ministry of Social Development by working age main beneficiaries is now $417 million, up on $377 million 5 years ago. I asked Social Development Minister Anne Tolley what that's made up of.
There's a whole long list of things, anything from ambulance subscription fees, attendance at funerals, bedding, furniture, bonds, rent, car repairs, clothing, electricity, home repairs, fridges, freezers, whiteware, glasses, safety footwear, school costs, school stationery, school uniform, and the list goes on. Telephone installation.
Emergency housing?
Yes, that could be part of it.
So what is the total amount of recoverable debt that has been spent on emergency housing?
We can't, unfortunately, the system doesn't pull that out for us. So
you don't know?
No, the debt that we have, it'll be in each client's individual file, but we don't collate that.
So you are advancing this money directly to the hotels, right? WINS, when I say you, sorry, it's not you, Minister, WINS is advancing this money directly to the hotels. I've seen the forms. Yeah. So $1,100, $1,200, up to $1,700 a week is going directly to the lodges or motels. Yeah. And you don't know how much in total is owed as a result of those payments? No,
well, we know how much we've got from, we can break it down into those sorts of figures that you're quoting. There's about 1.2, almost $1.3 billion in debt owed to the taxpayers of New Zealand, and we can break it down into some of those, whether it's a recoverable payment or an overpayment, etc., or fraud.
Do you have any idea of the scale of the emergency housing debt?
Well, we know the numbers of people that we have on our books who are looking for houses. So those sorts of numbers we can draw out at any one time.
But you don't know how big the emergency housing debt is?
No, I can't tell you what that is.
Okay. Do you think emergency housing is a good use of your money? And I've been speaking to people for a week and a half now, and they are paying in a range of $1,100 to $1,700 a week for very basic units.
Well, each case, of course, is an individual, but, we say to people who are, often people, well, most of these people are in a crisis situation in their lives for one reason or another. And so they come into someone like Work and Income. Are you suggesting that we turn them away? Because that's not the New Zealand that we have. We have a system that supports them, so they'll get some emergency payment for housing if there's nowhere available, and then Work and Income will work with them to get long-term housing. Now, for some people, there's a whole lot of reasons why that's extremely difficult. In some parts of New Zealand, there's a whole lot of reasons, and Auckland's one of them, where there is a huge shortage of it. But I was in Blenheim last week, and they had 9 of their Housing New Zealand houses out P-contaminated, and they could be out for up to 6 months.
Okay, now no one is suggesting, I don't think anyone who is decent or rational is suggesting you turn these people away.
No, so you've got to put them somewhere while you work with them.
But it just seems to me, and the more, it just seems recklessly expensive what you're paying. I went to a motor lodge in Takanini last week where the people were paying between $1,100 and $1,300 a week, up to $195 a night, for accommodation that was so basic that it defied my comprehension that it was so expensive.
And when you talk to the work and income staff who are managing that, they feel exactly the same way. But what are the alternatives? These are people who need something now, often, for various reasons, and some people have walked out of a violent relationship with a couple of kids. We have to put them somewhere.
But doesn't it speak to the fact that actually no one is addressing the larger problem? And that is a housing shortage where you would be able to provide homes for way, way, way less than that kind of money. You wouldn't be having people moving around. You wouldn't be having people crowded into small units. You would have people with connections to the community. You would have people who would be able to enrol their children at local schools and have ordinary lives if you had a housing stock, right?
That's right, and that's what the problem is in Auckland, and that's what we've been working on for the last 8 years. But there are other parts of New Zealand where there is housing stock, but it might not be available. I mean, Housing New Zealand doesn't always have 100% of its houses available. It might be doing up a house between tenants. As I say, there's P-contamination is taking out more and more of those houses. So you need to put that person in an emergency situation somewhere, and then the case manager sits down and they start working through with them to get a long-term solution.
So how long is emergency, ideally?
Well, we're saying emergency housing should be no more than 12 days.
Okay, so I've spoken to people...
That should give plenty of time.
I've spoken to a woman today who has been paying between $1,200 and $1,700, money she's had to borrow from WINZ since last September.
When whereabouts in the country?
In Auckland.
Yeah, that's right. So we recognise, we've been through this, we went through this with Christchurch, and we put 2,000 places into Christchurch for emergency housing, and we've tried. We've pretty much got on top of it in Christchurch. Now our focus is, and the minister announced last week, 3,000 places for emergency housing, plus the needs grant.
Sorry, Minister. Sorry, I know this is a different minister. This is Paula Bennett.
Yeah,
were they new beds? Were they new beds?
Well, some of them were new beds, but some of them are payments to social housing providers who were providing those emergency places and not being compensated.
See, you know what it seems like? It seems like to tackle the problem long term would require political leadership and big visionary ideas, building housing stock, investing in it. And in a way, that's a hard thing for the national government to sell. Whereas if you are just simply able to say, this is emergency housing, we will sort it, hopefully it won't last longer than 7 days, you can kind of sweep the problem under the rug. Except, by golly, $1,200, $1,700 a week is an expensive rug.
Well, there is no... Look, don't for 1 minute think that emergency housing queues are new. They've been around for a long time. I was on the Napier City Council back in the late 80s, and we had problems with emergency housing then. There's never enough places if you don't move people on into long-term solutions. And some of the people we're dealing with have very difficult backgrounds. No landlord wants to have them in these properties.
So the answer is Housing New Zealand, surely, isn't it? The answer is a permanent
housing stock. Well, even Housing New Zealand is stopping some people from being in their houses because they're smoking and manufacturing pee in them.
Can I go back to the debt?
Yes.
And I met a woman today who owes $74,000. That's pretty extreme. I've met lots of people, though, and spoken to lots of people and heard about lots of people who owe a few $1,000s, $3,000 up to $20,000.
That's right.
Do you realistically think these people will be able to repay that?
Oh, well, we're recovering just on about $300 million a year from people who have got into debt. Yes, absolutely.
Is the emergency housing system a good system? Are you satisfied as the minister that what we're seeing, and by golly, I've seen a lot of it in the past week and a half, and I've visited these places and I've spoken to these people, is the best use of taxpayer money, the best treatment of these people, and the most effective solution to the housing crisis.
Well, I think you've always got to have emergency beds for people. We know that for a whole variety of reasons, some people find themselves in quite emergency situations. So you've always got to have those emergency beds.
$1,200 to $1,700 a week. Can't you say to these people, hey, we want a rate?
I mean, exactly. You took the words out of my mouth. I would hope that we are negotiating good prices with those motel owners. Actually, in Christchurch, we leased a whole motel as emergency housing.
Is that happening in Auckland? Is that happening in Auckland?
Well, with the budget money, that may well happen.
So it's not happening in Auckland. So this is piecemeal, ad hoc.
Yep.
You don't know the extent of the debt. You don't know how much emergency housing money has been loaned or is owed.
What we know is that there are social service agencies in Auckland. It's piecemeal because they've been carrying the load. We pay for some, but we're not paying for nearly enough. So now we've put money into the budget and said to them, look, we're going to pay for those beds. There's some wraparound services for those clients that we're also putting into the deal, and then we think we can start getting on top of the wider problem. Of course, is having somewhere for those people to move into and having some housing stock that is available, and that's a bigger piece of work that Nick Smith's been doing with Auckland, and let's hope, the Auckland Council is very sensible and lifts some of the restrictions on planning that allows those houses to be built.
Antoli, who is the Social Development Minister, gosh, there is a lot to discuss here. And we're going to look at the specific case, more specifically anyway, of the $74,000 debt after 6 o'clock. We're also going to hear from the Ministry, that was the Minister of Social Development. We're going to hear from the Ministry of Social Development after 6 o'clock. Our reporter Alex Ashton is putting a piece together now. But Labour's Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, has been looking at debt the beneficiaries have racked up with wins, $417 million. She joins us now from our parliamentary office. Welcome to the program.
Hi, John.
You know, boy, this is complex, isn't it? Because some of these people are so damaged and they need care, and the issue is, how is that care provided when they can't afford private rents? Housing New Zealand in some cases has evicted them. What happens? What needs to be done?
Well, firstly, we need to know the full extent of the issue, and that's why I asked about the level of debt that Work and Income New Zealand clients are carrying. But unfortunately, when it comes to breaking it down, the response I get from the Ministry is that they will not be investing the resource or time into separating out that data for us. So until we know how much money has actually been spent on motel accommodation as an emergency option, then we don't know the full extent of the problem.
And Tolly just clarified that. No one knows how much has been spent on emergency accommodation. The figures you've obtained say $470 million main beneficiary debt in total, but there is no breakdown of how much of that has been spent on emergency housing at these exorbitant rates.
No, that's right. And so, it's negligent of the government to say that actually they're not going to invest the time required or the resource required to give us that information, when actually that's in the public interest. When we hear about the government spending $1,500 a week on emergency accommodation for people in a motel, then we're concerned that actually that money could be better off spent elsewhere. But until we know the full extent of that debt, then we don't know how much money our government is wasting on the stopgap measure.
Okay, so someone turns up at a WINS office, there is nowhere for them to live. They have children, and everyone that I've spoken to in emergency accommodation in the past week and a half has been in that emergency accommodation with children. What does WINS do? Because, as Antoli says, no decent society would turn those people away. What happens? What should happen?
Well, I mean, of course, what they do is they look for emergency housing options. And I know that in Auckland, there's an emergency accommodation tool that they use through Work and Income New Zealand, and that will pull up any vacancies in places. The problem at the moment is that the NGOs that, you know, provide the more responsible types of emergency social housing are underfunded. They don't have the beds. We're contacting them from my electorate office to see whether they have spaces, and they don't. So people are then told, okay, here's an emergency accommodation option, here's a motel. Now, some families that we've spoken to have said that actually they'd rather sleep in their car than have that debt build up from staying in a motel, and so some of them are choosing to do that instead of taking up the motel.
So what needs to happen? What needs to happen that can realistically happen fast?
Well, what needs to happen first, because there's no silver bullet to this, but we need a government that takes the housing crisis seriously. They need to build affordable homes for first home buyers. They need to be investing in state housing instead of hocking it off. And I think, you know, the minister's talking about the number of houses she says have been contaminated by P, but I think there are hundreds and thousands more, or hundreds more, or thousands more that have actually been sold off by the government, and that's the real issue. And they need to be investing in social housing. Until they do those three things, then we're not going to be addressing the housing demand that we have.
Look, I have a sneaking suspicion Anne Tolley, if she was listening, would be nodding away and saying, goodness gracious, I agree with you. But all of that's kind of medium to long term. In the short term, to deal with what seems on the face of it to be both a broad brushstroke crisis and an intense personal crisis for these people, what needs to happen?
The government needs to be responsible with regards to getting a grip of what the full extent of the problem is. So that's the biggest issue. How can they address it when they won't even provide us with the figures that we need to see the full extent of the problem? That's a really good starting point, actually.
Okay, and then when somebody turns up and Housing New Zealand won't take them because they seem to have a history with some P association, they have 8 children, they have no money, they are desperate, what gets done?
Well, I mean, going back to addressing the housing demand issues, John, but then of course looking for credible, responsible social housing options, including with emergency housing. We do have NGOs out there that are doing a good job but are severely underfunded, and we know that the $41 million that the government's invested is actually to actually fund them because they have been underfunded, but it's looking at what level of support they need to be able to address the need that's out there.
Carol Sepuloni, the Labour Social Development spokesperson, who obtained those figures, about $417 million of total main beneficiary debt to WINZ. Gosh, this is a big issue. 5:27. Let's change the subject entirely, although we will be back with housing after 6 o'clock. Ihaya Gilman-Harris thought he was driving 2 young men to a motel room for sex. Instead, they bashed him to death with a bat and stole his car. Today at the High Court in Auckland, Leonard Natras Bergquist and Bowen Wallace-Loretz were sentenced to life in prison. Wallace-Loretz will serve a minimum of 11 years before he's eligible for parole. Natras Bergquist will spend 3 months less in recognition of his stringent bail conditions while on remand. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Wallace-Loretz and Natras Bergquist were just 17 when they met Mr Gilman-Harris late one night in 2014 on Auckland's Queen Street. Days later, they agreed to go to a motel for sex with the 54-year-old for money, but on the way they sent over 200 text messages in which they planned to rob and bash him. The pair later left him for dead in a motel room, taking cash and making off in his Range Rover. Instead of calling an ambulance, they went to a party. Mr Gilman-Harris was found by motel staff and died hours later alone in hospital. His brother, Hoane Harris, told the court of his brother's rich whakapapa from Tuwharetoa and Ngāpuhi. He said his eldest son is named after Ihaya, and while it's a blessing, it's also tinged with sadness because now it's a constant reminder of the murder.
The mental image of him cowering and calling for help as he was set upon by these two. Brother, I'm sorry for not being able to save your life. I would have, brother, if I could.
He also expressed his sorrow that his brother suffered in pain alone in hospital in the last hours of his life. Mr Harris then directed his comments to the 2 teenagers.
I have 4 sons and a daughter. They all have young children. You two have ultimately denied them of their granduncle and uncle. And that is just my children. There are cousins and children. A lot of children. Ihaya comes from a huge family. You stole his life. Who gave you the right to steal my brother's life?
He said he couldn't forgive the pair for contaminating his life, but 2 other members of the Gilman-Harris whānau did express their forgiveness. Sharon Harris said she was broken-hearted by her brother's death. She read statements from her siblings, including an older sister, who described Mr Gilman-Harris's home birth in a small town south of Tokoroa. She said he was so small he could fit into a man's slipper, and it was touch and go whether he'd survive.
The old married queer that delivered him was so scared of that birth. She never delivered any more babies after him. It is ironic that in the last moments of his life, he was still fighting to stay alive. He didn't deserve to die like that. No one does.
The Crown asked for a minimum non-parole period of 17 years because the murder was carried out during an aggravated robbery. But defence lawyers said that would mean the teenagers would spend half their present lifespans in prison. In sentencing, Justice Toogood also took into account the undeveloped brains of young men and the fact they struggled to fully appreciate the consequences of their actions.
You did not intend to kill Mr Gilman-Harris or even turn your mind to the risk of death. You were convicted of murder only because he died as a result of an attack in which you planned only to cause him really serious harm so you could rob him.
The judge recognised both teenagers had prospects in life and hoped they'd get the help they needed while inside prison. He told the pair their futures were in their hands. For Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
5:31 on Checkpoint. Coming up, the government defends its record on building houses in Auckland as it prepares to announce more money for Crown land and social housing in Thursday's budget. What's today? Tuesday, so 48 hours away. 4 people in 4 days lose their lives on Everest. Is it time for Blenheim to become Marlborough City? And a secret stash of century-old wine is discovered beneath the floorboards of a castle in Czechoslovakia. Also after, so that's all before 6, after 6, the MSD and this housing issue, historic, in-depth after 6. We'd love to hear from you tonight. Do text us 2101. You can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz or contact us through our Twitter or Facebook feeds. Thank you for listening and thank you for your feedback. Katrina now with the 5:30 headlines.
The government will deliver more money for buying Crown land, for building houses and for social housing in Thursday's budget. The Building and Housing Minister, Nick Smith, has also flagged an increasing problem with buildings failing inspections. The government's coming under increasing pressure over housing as budget day approaches, in light of its continued insistence there's no housing crisis. New figures reveal the total amount of debt beneficiaries owe to work and income is more than $400 million. The Labour Party obtained the figure from a written parliamentary question to the Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley. The $417 million is total debt owed to the end of June 2015, including for emergency housing. The brother of a man who was bashed to death in a motel room told the 2 killers today they had no right to take his brother's life. Bowen Wallace-Loretz and Leonard Natras Berquist have been jailed for life with minimum non-parole periods of 11 years and 10 years and 9 months, respectively, for murdering Ihaya Gilman-Harris. A diver has stopped the flow of diesel leaking from a sunken boat in the Coromandel Harbour. Waikato Regional Council says the diver blocked the breathers of the Pleasure Craft's fuel tank, from which a small amount of diesel had been escaping. Greece has begun evicting thousands of stranded migrants from the makeshift Idomeni camp on its northern border with Macedonia. The operation began at dawn and witnesses reported police vehicles and buses standing by to transfer people to better organised facilities. $2 million worth of methamphetamine has been found in the luggage of a Northland man returning home from a trip to South Africa. A 60-year-old man has appeared in court charged with importing a Class A drug. I'll be back at 6 o'clock with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. I look forward
Mid-swallow there. Sorry about that.
Nona and I are both recovering from something thoroughly unpleasant. I think I'm actually recovering faster than you are, Nona Peltier.
Well, you know.
It's ginseng tea.
Yeah,
it's the ginseng tea in my Checkpoint mug. Yeah. Nona, business, there was more red ink today for insurance company Tower.
That's right, and that was reflected in our closing share price as well. I mean, our market price, our NZX Top 50 Index, it fell 0.5% to 35 points. 6,873. Well, we'll come back to that later, but the tower's share price, that fell 12%, which is quite a lot. That's 21 cents. And so basically the company reported another first half loss.
Yep.
And $8.7 million, which is, okay. I mean, they made a loss before as well. They've been hit again by the Canterbury earthquake. Still, they're dealing with that. They also...
It does seem extraordinary. It's 5 years on. 5 years on. In fact, we're in the 6th year now.
Yes. Well, I guess it just goes to show you how much damage there really was there. And, of course, it's a difficult situation, not just for the insurance companies, but, of course, for the people who are still waiting for their places to be fixed, right? And also, the company took a write-down on their computer system. So they looked at their computer system and said, this isn't working for us, and it's costing us more. So they're going to write down $14 million.
Wow.
In their IT, and they say that it was an obstacle for their performance. So they need to get rid of it so they can actually improve their performance. And that also saw that their expenses were higher, management costs were higher, and their premium income was flat. Their claims were up, and the weather didn't help them either.
Oh, yes, some flooding.
Well, they had flooding, but they also had Cyclone Winston.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it really was a tough period for the company. And, I think things are looking a little bit better for them. They're weather agreeing with them, hopefully. Yeah. So that was the story with Tower for today.
How are we going for time? I'm just... Oh, no, that's it. We're running. We're jam-packed. No, I was going to ask you some other stuff, but let's do the markets.
Well,
Tell us about the markets,
you can ask me. We have a lot of days in the week here, so I'm sure we can get around to it.
So there's a question I wanted to ask you today. I'll ask you it tomorrow.
That's right.
Excellent.
I'll be here tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
So the New Zealand dollar is trading at 67.2 US cents and 93.3 Australian.
Nona Peltier, in brief, there will be the 12-inch extended dance remix tomorrow night. Thanks, Nona. The government is defending its record on building houses in Auckland as it prepares to announce more money for Crown land and social housing in Thursday's budget. The Building and Housing Minister, Nick Smith, told reporters they had invented promises after being questioned about the progress of the $52 million package to buy Crown land for house building in last year's budget. The government's coming under increasing pressure over the issue as budget day approaches, but continues to insist there is no housing crisis. Here is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Nick Smith confirmed negotiations to buy 3 sites on which to build 740 houses have been completed and the $52 million has all been spent. He denies promising last year that thousands of houses would be built and says he's always talked about potential numbers.
No, look, you invent promises. What I said very specifically at the time was the government was providing $52 million contingency for us to be able to purchase public land for housing. We've effectively spent all of that money. That's going to provide nearly 1,000 homes. I'm seeking additional funding in Thursday's budget.
In Parliament this afternoon, the Labour leader Andrew Little asked the Prime Minister John Campbell about his minister's claims.
How can he have confidence in bumbling Nick Smith, who promised 500 hectares of new housing on Crown land last budget, but only found 13 hectares and is now claiming he never made any promise at all?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, I have confidence in the Minister of Building and Housing because he's undertaking a wide range of initiatives when it comes to housing. And what we're seeing is a considerable increase in the number of houses that are being built. And yesterday the Minister announced that 3 sites in Auckland will be paving the way for 750 new homes.
The Greens co-leader Matiria Ture asked Mr Key about today's release of tourism research that estimates 26 extra hotels need to be built over the next 10 years to accommodate booming visitor numbers.
Doesn't the Prime Minister think that in the midst of a housing crisis, his government should prioritise Project Homes for New Zealanders and not Project Palace for tourists?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, I reject the member's decision.
But it's not just a lack of houses that's posing a challenge to the government. Dr Smith says the speed of new house construction means a greater number of builds around the country are failing inspections. He says the problem's been getting worse over the past 2 years as the pace of building has increased.
Building inspectors across New Zealand are working every day on building sites. They are finding with the huge growth, we've got an extra 40,000 people working in home construction across New Zealand, that they are picking up issues of skills, resulting in a greater level of building inspections failing.
Dr Smith says it's a balance between trying to get as many new homes built as possible while also maintaining quality. In terms of other housing initiatives, the government's also signalled there will be some money in the budget to increase the supply of social housing. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Coming up to 20 to 6, Marlborough City sounds like it could be a football club or a quaint English tourist spot. Marlborough City. In fact, it's the new name being proposed for Blenheim, and now its promoters are facing a backlash they didn't quite expect. A group of business people from the region and the top of the South Island, of course, say the name Marlborough is now widely recognised because of the wine industry. Sauvignon Blanc, world famous, not only in New Zealand, but hardly anyone knows where Blenheim is, the region's main centre. That's what they say. Our top of the South reporter, Tracy Neal, says the idea seems to have woken a sleeping giant.
You can tell the locals from the outsiders by the way they pronounce Blenheim. Call it Blenheim, like the once trendy 1980s casked wine, and you'll be met with a parochial smirk. The group driving the change are a bit tired of the jokes about the town and want it elevated to the status befitting a prime wine-growing region in New Zealand. Mitchell Gardner, the General Sales Manager at Alan Scott Family Estate, is urging calm.
Yeah, realistically, if anything, we're probably in the firing line for a hell of a lot more bad press than we are for anything positive, particularly of late. So anything that is good to help promote Marlborough, to get people talking about Marlborough, is surely only a good thing.
The keyboard warriors have come out in force, saying things like Blenheim needs a lot more than a name change to make it less boring. Others say it's a good idea, but it's pushing the proverbial uphill given the fierce opposition. Retired Marlborough farmer Wallace Leo, whose family has been in Marlborough since the 1860s, says leave it as Blenheim.
It's only a hamlet or a village anyway. Why be so bold with the city?
Mr. Leo cautions against hanging all hopes on the wine industry as being the reason for change.
We go in bursts, and we're having one of those at the moment, but you've only got to have Sauvignon Blanc go out of fashion a bit, and because we're so reliant on the grapes, we can go into a backwater very quickly. So I'd be reluctant to see a change.
Blenheim's population of just over 26,500 people means it falls short of the population threshold needed to become a city. But just over the hill, Nelson City's 46,000 people might well be puzzled. They at least have a cathedral and an 1858 letter from Queen Victoria granting it city status. Marlborough Mayor Alistair Soman says the idea has caught him by surprise, and while he doesn't want to knock it, he's not in support.
It's a big job to change the name of a town, especially when you want to equate it with wine regions, and I think this is where they've made a mistake. I think if you look at the wine regions around the world, Bordeaux, Burgundy, they're all regions, and Marlborough is the wine region. I'm not quite sure why they wanted to change the name of Blenheim. I thought promoting the region would have been a better deal.
Mr. Soman says it's actually not that straightforward changing a town's name.
There's more to this than just changing the name of a town. You've got to look at your history and so forth. But I think there's a lot to happen before we get serious about that.
Mitchell Gardner says people need to calm down a little and try to understand what they're trying to achieve.
I guess the original concept behind when we first talked about changing the name was only to benefit Marlborough anyway. So,
Mr. Gardner says the group plans to press ahead and organise meetings with local business and council organisations with the aim of setting up a working group. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
The dangers of climbing the world's highest peak are once again in the spotlight, with 4 climbers dead on Mount Everest in just 4 days and 2 others missing. It's a chilling death toll which has rattled the dozens of people still high up on the mountain waiting to descend as this year's climbing season comes to an end. The victims include a Sherpa and 3 foreign climbers. One of them is a 34-year-old Australian woman. Her family is hid out at Arnold Costa Expeditions, the tour company involved, saying it didn't even contact them about her death. Instead, her sister found out about it online. The ABC's Lindy Kerrin reports.
There are conflicting reports about exactly what happened on the world's highest peak. But it's understood Maria Stridham suffered severe altitude sickness and possibly a stroke. Alita Newman has paid tribute to her sister.
She was incredibly talented
She obtained a PhD by age 30. She loved the outdoors. She loved to run marathons. She climbed numerous mountains. She was really outgoing. Everyone that met her loved her.
The finance lecturer from Monash University was climbing with her husband, who is also suffering altitude sickness. Alita Newman says the couple are experienced climbers, well-trained and well aware of the risks.
This was not the first big mountain that they've attempted. They have successfully summited other mountains such as Denali in Alaska, Concagua in South America, which is part of the Andes mountain range. They've done Kilimanjaro and numerous other mountains as well. Certainly they were not novices.
Alita Newman says she found out about her sister's death through an online news report.
Before I went to bed, I just did a quick Google search on Everest News just to see what's news on the mountain, what's been reported. And I found a news report that was released 11 minutes prior by the Himalayan Times, naming my sister as having been deceased on Mount Everest. That was the first that I'd heard of it.
Mountaineer and Everest blogger Alan Arnett has climbed Everest 4 times and says it's extremely dangerous.
Everest is a dangerous mountain. You know, altitude sickness can strike anybody, whether you're inexperienced or a professional mountaineer, without any notice, and there's really nothing you can do about it either, other than get back down as quickly as possible.
And he says it appears the normal protocols about informing Maria Stridham's family haven't been followed. A 35-year-old Dutch climber, Eric Arnold, from the same party, has also died from altitude sickness. He'd survived last year's deadly avalanche on Mount Everest and died just hours after making it to the top on his 5th attempt. It's understood a Sherpa guide from a different party died while fixing ropes. Andrew Locke is considered to be one of Australia's most successful mountaineers. He says as the mountain has become more and more commercialised, the risks have increased.
There are so many people going up that it becomes crowded and people are slowed down in their ascent and descent up near the summit. And so they spend more time than they need to or than they should at those extreme altitudes, and even using oxygen. That helps, but it doesn't take away the effects of extreme altitude.
Climbing on the world's highest peak only started up again in April after the catastrophic earthquake struck Nepal last year. Andrew Locke says in terms of regulation, very little has changed.
The regulations are almost non-existent, apart from charging people to go there, and the whole industry needs to be completely revisited and genuinely regulated. You'll find on other big peaks in Western countries that the climbing industry is regulated, and the guides have to be fully qualified and very experienced to take people up lesser mountains than Mount Everest. And yet the highest mountain in the world is virtually an unregulated environment.
That is an extraordinary state of affairs, isn't it? It's 12.5 to 6. A fierce battle is being waged by Iraqi troops to try and retake the city of Fallujah from Islamic State. Fallujah, which is close to the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, was the first Iraqi city to fall to Islamic State in 2014. 6 months later, the group declared a caliphate across large parts of Iraq and neighbouring Syria. Now the Iraqi Prime Minister says a long-awaited offensive to retake the city is making better progress than expected. The BBC's Jim Muir has the latest.
Day 1 of the Fallujah offensive, codenamed Break Terrorism. This was one of the so-called Popular Mobilization Units, a group of mainly Shia irregulars unleashing a salvo of rockets onto the Sunni militants in Fallujah. The Shia militias are taking part in the offensive, but they're supposed to stay out of the city, a real stronghold of Sunni defiance for fear of sectarian repercussions. Regular army forces and special elite units were meanwhile pushing slowly forward towards Fallujah on several fronts, but they haven't yet reached the city's immediate outskirts. Announcing the offensive in a late-night television address, Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi promised victory.
We will tear down the black flags of Daesh, these despicable strangers who abducted our dear city. The time has come to liberate Fallujah, and the victory will be ours. Daesh will be forced to flee.
But it's unlikely to come quickly. Even government optimists say it could take several weeks. Fallujah has a long history of defiance. Back in 2004, it took a tremendous battering from American troops. Among them, this former U.S. Marine, Joseph Pace.
It's a maze, that city. For them to take back Fallujah, I think they're going to have to be careful on their strategy. I think they're going to have to take it slow.
That's already the pattern, with sappers defusing many roadside bombs and booby traps as the forces slowly advance. Their aim is to tighten the noose around the city more and more until they can press into the centre and take it over entirely. The militants have had more than 2 years to prepare for this battle, though they've also taken a heavy pounding from months of bombardment. If they choose to make a real stand, there may not be much left of the city by the time it's over. And there are fears for the tens of thousands of civilians believed to be trapped there. For months, under siege, the militants have prevented them from leaving. Now they're accused of using them as human shields.
That's the BBC's one and only Jim Muir, wonderful reporter. We want to apologise if you're trying to watch us on Freeview tonight. It's a bit all over the shop. It's just Freeview. We're still live streaming on our website and on YouTube, business as usual. And we are, of course, on the wireless, as we have been since 1732 at RNZ. More than 1,000 Department of Conservation bridges, bulwarks, jetties and viewing platforms are not up to standard. According to DOC figures obtained by the Green Party, 1,085 such structures do not meet the required service standard, but the minister responsible, Maggie Barry, says some of those are trifling problems and the department is on top of its work. Michael Kropp reports.
The information given by the department shows 38 structures have serious work tasks outstanding. 85 fail the barrier assessment, 168 fail the load capacity assessment, and another 85 are closed. DOC says those statistics provide only a snapshot of its ever-changing work program. In Parliament, the Minister Maggie Barry explained.
The data shows that about 13 of 944 huts, which DOC manages, had some serious work that was outstanding. Something as small as a missing hearth brush is enough to mean that a hut does not meet its service standards. The number needing serious work equates to just 1.3% of DOC's extensive network of often remotely located huts.
She says that serves to reinforce the thoroughness of DOC's inspection and maintenance regime. Last September, a cable on the Hōpurua-Hine suspension bridge near Lake Waikaremoana failed, flinging 4 French trampers into the river nearly 10 metres below. Of the 38 structures with serious work tasks outstanding, the minister says about a third have had that work done in the past month.
DOC takes its responsibilities very seriously. I will not and do not confirm that the repair that is needed is of a substantial nature. If it was dangerous, if our inspectors who go through regularly and inspect it thoroughly felt that there was any risk to public safety, those structures would be closed down.
The Green Party's conservation spokesperson Kevin Haig says it's symptomatic of the department's underfunding.
In this week's budget, will the government increase conservation funding to enable the Department of Conservation to ensure that the 142 species that have become closer to extinction do not become extinct, that people do not put their lives at risk on dock viewing platforms or bridges, and that our huts and tracks meet the expectations that New Zealanders have for them.
The minister says the Green Party is misrepresenting the issue and says DOC is adequately funded at the moment. Debs Martin is a forest and bird advocate and says DOC needs more money, and that's highlighted by its maintenance delays.
When I'm talking with the Department of Conservation about moving funding on quite significant issues, I just hear them saying our operations budget is shrinking, not expanding. What I have seen is structures being pulled out because they can't maintain them.
Ms Martin says because tourism is now the country's largest export earner, there is a reputational risk if DOC cannot afford to maintain the bridges, viewing platforms and other structures which are in use. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
6.5 to 6. So much feedback coming in. We will have some shortly. Donald Trump may insist that Egypt Air Flight 804 was blown out of the sky by terrorists, but investigators say all possible causes are still on the table. Some debris has been found, but there's still no sign of the fuselage or the black box. CNN's Ben Wiedemann reports the investigation is continuing on several fronts.
French authorities are, quote, poring over surveillance video to see who had direct contact with the plane or luggage before takeoff, according to the Wall Street Journal. This could include hundreds of airport workers. Egyptian authorities are continuing their investigation as well, asking France to provide information on the flight before it departed Charles de Gaulle, including audio recordings and video. The very same plane was also once the target of political graffiti, this according to the New York Times. The words, "We will bring this plane down," were painted on the underside of the Airbus 2 years ago. Egyptian authorities played down any connection, saying that was vandalism, not a threat of terrorism.
Investigations in these cases are based on facts, based on procedures, and these procedures doesn't include a statement that has been written on a plane.
Egyptian search teams say they recovered pieces of chairs, life vests, and personal belongings from the sea. Human remains also recovered, and Egyptian authorities have asked families to provide DNA to help identify the victims. Search crews continue to scour the water for the bulk of the wreckage, looking also for the crucial black boxes, which most likely lie on the ocean floor.
We will get within days all the necessary equipment needed to continue the search.
An Egyptian submarine has started its sweep, and the French military has sent in a remotely piloted sub to help. The French vessel is equipped with an acoustic probe to detect any signals from the flight recorders. Batteries on the black boxes can last for about 30 days if there is no significant damage to them. Terrorism is still a leading theory, though still no one has claimed responsibility. Some of the last words of the pilot are heard on air traffic control recordings. Captain Mohammed Shagir sounds calm in this routine check-in.
Hello, H-804, flight 7370.
The plane would fall off the radar in the hours after these words.
This is 0725, better for control, H-804. Thank you so much, good day. Good night.
That report from CNN, so much feedback on the housing issue tonight, and beneficiaries, $417 million of debt to WINS. Many of you are also emailing us pictures of empty state houses, and there are many around the country. Here's just a sample of your feedback. I find it impossible to believe that figures on spend for emergency accommodation is not available. Anne Tully said that wasn't available. If this was any business, those figures would be easily found. If it's true that they don't record these so that it cannot be sorted easily, then someone is incompetent and the minister needs to take responsibility, says Tim. Terence from Blenheim says some suggestions for immediate policy action are: 1. Declare a housing crisis. National needs to face facts. 2. As with the Christchurch earthquake, lease several motels at negotiated rates. 3. As with Christchurch, embark on an urgent program building demountable units on Crown land. 4. Convene Auckland social housing providers to establish and oversee a register of short-term voluntary accommodation Aucklanders would be willing to make available. Other people say move out of Auckland, quite a few people. They're not working, they don't need to be there, and there is cheaper housing in other ends of the country. Anne Tully cited Kawido as an example of that. Hi John, re-emergency housing, what happened to those prefabs that we put up in Christchurch just after the earthquakes? Are they available for relocation? Is the concept of a community of such houses viable for the local councils to have access to for emergency housing needs? Think of London after the Blitz. Council put up cheap and quick prefabs for homeless families, says Jackie in Queenstown. And buy some motels, someone says. Are these providers of emergency houses price gouging? I'm going to read this one very quickly because we've got another story coming up. I have an Airbnb property in central Ponsonby that can sleep 3 people, and at the most I charge this out at $1,200 a week. It's a great property. Why does a bad unit in Takanini cost so much? Yeah, it does seem like a really reasonable question. Thank you all for your feedback. Wine experts have enjoyed a rare taste of century-old fine wines after a secret stash was discovered beneath the floorboards in a Czech castle. Mana Rabi from Reuters reports.
Under the floorboards of this Czech castle in the town of Bekov, a treasure trove for wine lovers. More than 130 bottles of rare fine wines from the 1890s, buried by the castle's owners at the end of World War II to keep them safe from plundering soldiers. The wines were left largely untouched, even after their discovery in 1985. Now Czech authorities have invited sommeliers to carefully test the bottles for their value. Greg Lambrecht invented a device that carefully takes a sample of wine using a needle through the cork, keeping the bottle intact.
These are from a different age, made by people that are no longer with us.
in a time that is long gone. It's really a special thing to taste something that's been put into glass and sealed with cork for that long, capturing that era.
Master of Wine Andreas Wyckoff says this stash of Beckhoff wine is unique, especially since wines half as old often turn up.
We are extremely thrilled and very positively surprised about the condition of the wines. There was no sign of oxidation. The wines were in very, very stable condition.
Some of the bottles are worth over $30,000, and early estimates put the entire collection at over $1.2 million, proving the old adage that some things really are well worth the wait.
Boy, oh boy, that would be delicious. Katrina Patton, we'll never know, will we? No.
Never going to happen for us.
Never going to happen for us. What is going to happen for us is that we're going to sit here and just very quietly savour the magnificence of the Radio New Zealand pips. Here they come, ladies and gentlemen. Wait for it. State-of-the-art pips tonight. Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of our entire excellent team, thank you for being with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, why did one woman rack up a $60,000 housing debt to Wynn's emergency housing? Boy, this is a big issue. We looked at it at length after 5, spoke to Anne Tolley, spoke to Carmel Sepuloni. After 6, we dig into the Universal in the particular. What Joseph Parker has to say about people seeing his boxing match for free and how he does believe he can be #1 in the world. And US President Barack Obama joins locals for his dinner on his visit to Vietnam. Charming story, that one. But before all of that, Katrina Patton with RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. New figures show the total amount of debt beneficiaries owe to work and income is more than $400 million. But the Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, told Checkpoint the ministry doesn't know how much of that is emergency housing debt. However, she says there's no alternative.
These are people who need something now, often, for various reasons, and some people have walked out of a violent relationship with a couple of kids. We have to put them somewhere.
And Tolley says $300 million of debt is recovered every year. She says each case is individual and ideally emergency housing would be for no more than 12 days. Meanwhile, the Social Development Ministry says it's been working with a woman who's racked up a significant Wynn's debt and is staying in emergency accommodation with her 8 children. The woman, known as Jay, is running up the debt at a rate of more than $1,000 a week. She owes a total of $60,000. Carl Crafer from the ministry says Jay has been evicted from Housing New Zealand homes for ongoing meth use. He says the family is in an extremely vulnerable situation. The government will deliver more money for buying crowned land for building houses and for social housing in Thursday's budget. The Building and Housing Minister, Nick Smith, says progress is being made after a $52 million commitment to buy crowned land last year. However, he wants more money for that work to continue. He also says there's a specific problem emerging with a greater number of buildings failing inspections as new house construction ramps up. Dr. Smith says that's been getting worse in the past 2 years and a balance has to be struck between building houses at pace and maintaining quality.
Building inspectors across New Zealand are working every day on building sites. They are finding with the huge growth, we've got an extra 40,000 people working in home construction across New Zealand, that they are picking up issues of skills resulting in a greater level of building inspections failing.
Nick Smith says it's a balance between trying to get as many new homes built as possible while also keeping quality up. A Northland man returning home from a trip to South Africa has been caught with $2 million worth of methamphetamine in his luggage. The 60-year-old was arrested at Auckland International Airport on Sunday night after customs officials x-rayed his bag, finding 2 kilograms of the drug, also known as P, embedded in the lining. The Customs Investigations Manager, Maurice O'Brien, says the arrest was a joint trans-Tasman effort involving Australia's Department of Immigration and the Australian Crime Commission. The man has appeared in the Manukau District Court, charged with importing a Class A drug. The Conservation Minister says her department is doing a good job of maintaining its bridges, viewing platforms and other structures. The Green Party says it's been given figures showing more than 1,000 such structures do not meet the required service standard, and it says that's because DOC is underfunded. The minister responsible, Maggie Barry, says that provides only a snapshot of DOC's ever-changing work program. Ms Barry says the Green Party is misrepresenting the issue and DOC's inspection and maintenance regime is thorough.
DOC takes its responsibilities very seriously. I will not and do not confirm that the repair that is needed is of a substantial nature. If it was dangerous, if our inspectors who go through regularly and inspect it thoroughly felt that there was any risk to public safety, those structures would be closed down.
Maggie Barry says DOC is adequately funded at the moment. Peru has declared an environmental emergency in 11 Amazon jungle districts where mercury pollution caused by illegal gold mining is poisoning rivers. Tests on local people, animals and river water in the southeastern Madre de Dios region show mercury above permitted levels. The Environment Minister says the area will suffer the effects of the pollution for the next 80 years. Medical supplies and food will be sent to the region because people are being advised not to eat fish from the river. The exact location of 600 tonnes of reactor fuel that melted into highly radioactive blobs at Japan's Fukushima plant remains a mystery. Robots sent into the reactor have also been disabled by the high radioactivity. 3 reactors suffered catastrophic meltdowns after a tsunami swamped the Fukushima Daiichi facility in March 2011. The chief of decommissioning says the Tokyo Electric Power Company hopes to pinpoint the position of the fuel and begin removing it from 2021. In an interview with the ABC, Naohiro Masuda says the technology needed to remove the fuel has to be invented once the fuel is found. The company says stabilising and decommissioning the plant will take 30 to 40 years and tens of billions of dollars. 3 New Zealand crews are well placed to clinch Olympic spots at the last chance rowing regatta in Switzerland tonight. The women's single sculler Emma Twigg and the men's and women's quads all won their qualifying races ahead of their finals. Twigg has to finish in the top 4 to qualify for Rio, while the quads must be in the top 2. New Zealand's champion shot putter Valerie Adams believes Oceania deserves to host a World Athletics meeting. The first Diamond League meeting to be held in Africa was in Morocco yesterday, with Adams winning her event. Afterwards, she included IAAF boss Sebastian Coe in a tweet, suggesting Oceania could host a Diamond League meeting.
I love Morocco and I think it's a great thing that Rabat is able to have the first Diamond League in Africa. Hopefully one day we're able to take it down to Oceania and have a Diamond League down there so we can spread it around amongst everybody around the world.
Adams' next competition is the Diamond League meeting in Rome next week. Boxer Joseph Parker's gruelling 12-round IBF eliminator win over Carlos Takam could mount to little if he loses his next fight to Australian heavyweight Solomon Haumona. Parker's win over Takam at the weekend earned him a mandatory challenge against Britain's Anthony Joshua for the IBF title. However, that fight is unlikely to happen this year, and to remain ring fit, he'll fight Haumona in Christchurch in July, but if he loses that fight, he'll also lose his right to fight Joshua. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Ukrainian odyssey of Adriana Motis. Her mother was forced to flee that country during the 1940s. Adriana talks about taking her back to her homeland. We have a window on the world of war and music in Sri Lanka. And this week's pundit, our religious scholar Douglas Pratt, joins us from Switzerland, where the locals, you might recall, placed a ban on new minarets, but the army's thinking of hiring Muslim chaplains. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mainly fine. However, brief rain this evening and isolated showers tomorrow. For the rest of the North Island, showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail from later today, easing tomorrow evening. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, showers with isolated squally thunderstorms and hail from this evening, easing tomorrow afternoon and clearing in Marlborough and much of Nelson by evening. Westland, a few showers in the north, spreading to most places tomorrow. Canterbury, cloud increasing and scattered rain developing this evening, clearing tomorrow. Otago and Southland excluding Stewart Island, scattered rain developing about the south coast tomorrow morning and spreading north later. Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers becoming frequent and heavier tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's coming up to 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Ewan Mason, Professor at the School of Forestry, the University of Canterbury, where my uncle used to work in Christchurch, reminds us, of course, that the name for Blenheim was Te Waiharakeke. Te Waiharakeke, or just Waiharakeke, which is a beautiful name. And he says if they wish to go to the trouble of changing Blenheim's name, then change it back to Waiharakeke. Lots of people discussing that on Twitter. I'm all for it.
I reckon.
Lovely name.
Why not?
Just having a glass of nice Waiharakeke Sauvignon Blanc. Rolls off the tongue. Beneficiaries have borrowed more than $400 million from the Ministry of Social Development, and the total value of those loans continues to grow. This is how we began the program tonight, looking at this issue. We spoke to the Minister, we spoke to the opposition, and we heard the case of a woman who owes $74,000. Checkpoint has talked to many people over the last week who've racked up thousands of dollars of debt to work and income, money they borrowed to stay in motels. But while the government knows how much it's owed in total, it doesn't know how much it's loaned people specifically for emergency housing. So that's part of the $417 million. No one knows how much. Alex Ashton's report begins with a woman who's been living in a motel since last September, talking about the bill she's racked up.
$75,000.
And how have you racked most of that debt up?
Housing, emergency housing, which is my motel that I stay at.
So since you were chucked out of your Housing New Zealand house, what sort of weekly rents have you been paying for emergency housing?
The most I've paid is $17.90.
That's Jay, not her real name. Checkpoint isn't naming her because her situation is complex. The Ministry of Social Development says she's been evicted from 3 state houses after they all tested positive for methamphetamine. She has 8 children living with her, and MSD puts her housing-related debt at $60,000. Jay's borrowing money from WINS to stay at a motel. MSD's Deputy Chief Executive, Carl Crafer, says they're working with the family through what is a delicate situation, and they're focused on the children involved.
The key thing from my perspective is that we have got a roof over the children's heads. That is extremely important from our perspective. I do believe that Jay has contributed to the situation she's currently in, but we want to continue to work with her to make sure we can get the best outcome from the children's perspective.
In 2011, the total debt owed to MSD by working age beneficiaries was $377 million. As of last June, the end of the last financial year, that debt had jumped $40 million to $417 million. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says those loans cover everything from ambulance fees and furniture to car repairs and motels. But she says she can't say how much of it is going on motel bills. And Mrs. Tolley says most people who borrow money for a hotel room are in crisis.
Are you suggesting that we turn them away? Because that's not the New Zealand that we have. We have a system that supports them so they'll get some emergency payment for housing if there's nowhere available, and then work and income will work with them to get long-term housing.
An advocate with Auckland Action Against Poverty, Alistair Russell, says the government should just wipe the debt and pay the bill.
Work and income are choosing for these families to build up these enormous debts. They have the ability to write this off and give them the families this money as non-recoverable grants, but just simply choose not to do so.
Labour's social development spokesperson, Carmel Sepuloni, says taxpayers have financed that debt and the public has a right to know where it's being spent.
They should do the responsible thing and actually break it down so that there's some transparency about where this debt is coming from. I mean, we know that there's a high level of public interest in the motel accommodation option and the fact that people are being thrown into debt. So the government should be telling us what this debt is made of.
From September, the government will start paying for 1 week of motel accommodation for desperate families. But advocates say the debts that beneficiaries already owe need to be wiped from the books. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
We've had quite extraordinary feedback on this tonight. Thank you all. We're going to bring you another sample of it right now. I can't believe people are comparing Auckland to London after the Blitz. and Christchurch after the quakes. Good grief, does that mean the disaster is the state of the country? Simple solution, the government should just buy a whole lot of motels, says Doug. WINS get their loans back by deducting money each week from people's benefits. Those barely getting by on their benefit are now getting less for many years until their debt is repaid, a lifetime for some. Not only that, they are now ineligible for further loans should they need dental work or something else they can't afford on their benefit. Your minister sounded proud about the money being repaid. They're taking it from benefits. Is this really the New Zealand we want? And what kind of damage are we doing to a future New Zealand? Patrick says, John, we have no problem building great prisons to house those we don't want on the streets. Why can't we do the same for those who will end up in said prisons or hospitals if we don't look after them? And lots of people saying the government shouldn't charge people for emergency accommodation more than they would pay for a house with Housing New Zealand. We do really appreciate your feedback. Thank you. You can text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Right. The New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker says it's disappointing his fight against Carlos Takam was live streamed and viewed for free by thousands on Saturday night. A Porinua man broadcast the $50 pay-per-view fight on his Facebook page by using his phone to film the television. It was viewed by at least 20,000 people for free. Joseph Parker likened it to stealing. Today he announced he will fight former Australian league player turned boxer Solomon Haumono in Christchurch on July 21st as he prepares for an IBF heavyweight title fight against Britain's Anthony Joshua later this year. This afternoon he came into the studio and I asked him how he was feeling after Saturday's 12-round win over Carlos Takam.
The body's not too bad. I think being fit for the fight, it sort of helped me after the fight. I was in great shape, so I think it was a hard fight, tough 12 rounds. But at the end of the fight, I think the adrenaline sort of got me through the fight, and then once it wore off, I feel a little pain here and there, but other than that, everything's fine.
Carlos Takam was a good opponent, wasn't he? He was a good opponent because he pushed you for 12.
Yep.
He was a good opponent because he took a lot of punishment and he kept standing. By golly, he kept standing, and he got some punches in.
Oh, he definitely did, and we knew that he was going to come prepared. He came 100% prepared. He lost a lot of weight for the fight. In previous fights, he was a lot heavier, and we knew that he was going to come forward and throw a lot of punches, which he did. He landed some good shots, which I felt, but no, it didn't. It was good to get the result in the end.
When you say you felt them, describe the moment when they hit. What happens then?
He threw one nice right hand, which I felt landed here, and it sort of my jaw sort of swelled up after the fight. And he landed one nice left hook, and when you sort of rings your bell. And but it goes away in a second or 2 seconds.
Because of adrenaline?
Yeah, because of adrenaline.
How do you control the psychological response? Because that would make you angry as an ordinary person, right? So how do you stay in control of what's required of you as a fighter?
I think with the previous fights, the 18 fights that we had before Takam, I was able to learn how to control my anger or learn how to control what I'm doing in the ring. There's a few fights where I've lost the control and I started brawling, which we found wasn't a good thing.
Understandable though, as a young man, right? Someone hits you, you think, yeah, right, damn you.
Yeah, like damn you, I'll get you back.
Yeah.
But I think with fighting often and getting experience, you're able to learn and you're able to control yourself in the ring.
So your next opponent though, Solomon Haumono, is 40, I think.
Yeah.
159 first grade rugby league games. He's super fit. He can take a lot of punishment.
Yeah.
And whilst I think people would expect you to beat him, he's going to be quite tough, isn't he?
He's going to be very tough. And the reason I say that, he comes with a lot of power. He's a fighter who likes to come forward. He's good. He's got more experience than I have. And most of his opponents he's knocked out. And the way that I see it is that at the moment I'm in a great position where I'm the number one. I'm the mandatory for the IBF heavyweight world champion.
But if you lose this, if you lose that fight, you won't get that.
Then I won't get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Which means he's going to come, I think, with more drive because he wants what I have.
Yeah. Bob Jones, right, says you have what it takes but not yet. You're too young. And by the standards of a fighter challenging for number one, you are still really young. Is it too soon at the age of 24 to be going for this?
Me, personally, it's not too soon. And I respect everyone's opinion. Bob Jones is a great guy. He looked after me in the beginning of my career and I respect what he has to say. But the way that I see it is I'm prepared. I back myself 100% with any fighter I jump in the ring with. And there are things that I did on Saturday which I'm not impressed with or happy with.
Defence in particular?
Defence, and also things, standing upright, the chin being up in the air, things that we didn't do in camp, or things that we did do in camp I didn't display on fight night. And it just comes down to, I think that the camp was too long. The body took a beating.
The camp was too long?
Yeah, it was a 12-week camp. I think it was too long.
Okay, explain that to me. So by the end, actually, you were kind of physically exhausted. So the physical strength you needed to be as disciplined as you would like had somewhat gone.
Had somewhat gone. So I went into camp in good shape. I trained hard for 8 weeks, and about the 9th week, I felt like my body hit a wall. And I went from sparring 10 rounds comfortably to not even being able to spar 4 rounds. So I think the camp was too long, and it's good that we actually did it. So we learned that the body agrees better with short camps.
Can I talk to you about the business of boxing? Because suddenly you are going to start making yourself and a whole lot of other people a lot of money. How do you protect yourself from people saying, go now, Joseph, because, you know, it's going to be payday for everyone? How do you protect your long-term interests from boxing's reputation sometimes of exploiting young boxers?
I'm grateful that I have a great team who surround me. And the team that I have is a team that only wants the best for me. Now, there are boxers and there are examples of boxers getting ripped off or boxers getting thrown into fights too early or too soon, but I believe I have the right team. I believe I have the right team, my management team. I believe I have the right promotional team, and I believe I have a great coach who looks after me and who guides my career to what it is now.
Do you reckon you could be number one?
Oh, no doubt.
No doubt.
No doubt. I mean, I've had a dream since a young boy to be champion of the world, and I believe I'll get to that stage very soon.
When you had a dream of being champion of the world, who was it you looked up to? Who were the fighters that you thought, I want to be like him?
The one of the best examples to me for a heavyweight is Lennox Lewis, and the reason I say that, he used his height and his reach. He was smart about the way that he boxed. But then after boxing, he was smart about how he invested his money and how he went about with business side of things.
And famously, of course, David Tua, another Samoan New Zealander, had a challenge against Lewis, and Lewis just held his arms out and kept him away, right?
Yes.
Did you watch that fight over and over and over?
Yes, I did. I remember watching it when I was about 8 years old with my uncles, and we all gathered around this TV and watched it. We were all cheering on Tua because he's our man. But the way that Lennox fought that fight was a very smart fight. He fought it very smartly.
And so you are the next Samoan New Zealander, the next New Zealander to challenge for number one.
Yeah, I'm the next New Zealander to challenge for number one, and I really believe I'll get there. You know, I have great support from our country.
Two countries. You have great support from two countries.
Yeah.
New
Zealand and Samoa, and the messages that I get push me through the hard times and motivate me when I'm in camp.
Anthony Joshua is a good boxer, though, right?
He's a good boxer. I have a lot of respect for him, but I'll do the job.
Your fans are going to be wanting to watch, right? They're going to be wanting to watch. They're going to be wanting to scream you on. And if they yell loud enough, you'll hear them. Some of them are going to pay $50 to watch it on Sky. Some of them, I think, will travel to see you do it in person. And others, it seems, are going to be watching it stream on Facebook. What do you say to the people who did that?
For me, it's a little disappointing. And the reason I say that is because we work hard as a team. Duco events, it's a risky business for them. They put on this event, and if everything goes wrong, they lose a lot of money. I work hard in the gym, I train hard, and I go out there to put on a great show for everyone. But when they stream the fights, they're stealing from us. Mostly stealing from me. I'm the one that's going to war. So I get why they do it, and it's $50. I know it's a lot of money to a lot of people, but they were showing it at pubs, and I think maybe you can text your friend or your family and go to their house and watch it there as a group. But yeah, that's the way I see it.
You're looking forward to this? 2 fights, really? Solomon and Anthony Joshua?
I'm excited. The heavyweight division is alive again. I'm excited for this next challenge I have, but at the back of my mind, I'm looking at Joshua. And I believe 2 young fighters like us, being in a ring together, trained our hearts out and giving it everything, it's going to be a great war.
Good luck, Joseph.
Thank you.
Joseph was in the studio here in Auckland. So I'm just going to cough. Excuse me, earlier today. Very gentle when he's here in person. Bizarre, isn't it? Because when you see him box, it's the last word you would think of. But when he's in the studio, everyone commented on it. Just before we move on from sport, very quickly, NFL star quarterback Tom Brady will appeal his suspension over last year's Deflategate scandal for a second time. Brady, who plays for the New England Patriots and is on a $41 million contract, was suspended last year after it was revealed underinflated footballs were used in a game. His suspension was reversed last September, but reinstated by a court last month. Big news in the US, even if you don't like gridiron. Here's Nathan Frandino.
New England Patriots quarterback Tom Brady is appealing his suspension for the Deflategate scandal for the second time. His lawyer, Ted Olson, has been quoted as saying the facts are so drastic that the court should rehear the case. Brady was suspended in May 2015 after the NFL found that underinflated footballs were used in a Patriots playoff win over the Indianapolis Colts. Brady's suspension was reversed in September 2015, but was reinstated last month by the Court of Appeals. The win over the Colts propelled the Patriots to the Super Bowl, where they beat the defending champion Seattle Seahawks, giving Brady his fourth championship title. Brady has denied knowing about any plan to deflate footballs.
$41 million, his contract. Quite extraordinary, US. Goodness gracious me. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves, which is about 5.5 minutes away. Islamic State militants kill over 180 people, and the UN summit gets underway on the world's humanitarian crises. Boy, there is a lot for them to discuss. Austria's far right has been narrowly pipped at the post. We looked at this last night. They were still counting the postal votes in a tightly fought general election. Norbert Hofer, who would have become the European Union's first far right head of state, well, in recent years anyway, has been beaten by Alexander Van der Bellen by just 31,000 votes. Mr Van der Bellen is a pro-EU independent backed by the Greens, so they really were chalk and cheese, these two. He's vowing to address the divisions among Austrians, which he says the election has brought to the surface.
It
was the announcement that all of Austria and much of Europe was waiting on, that Alexander Van der Bellen had won the presidency over his rival, far-right anti-immigration candidate, Norbert Hofer. It was the tiniest of margins, with the 72-year-old former Greens leader winning 50.3% of the vote. The president-elect promised to listen to the Austrian people. A lot of people in this country do not feel seen or heard enough, or both, he said. We will need a different culture. He also promised to pursue togetherness over separateness. Freedom Party candidate Norbert Hofer was expected to win. He conceded defeat on Facebook, saying, "Of course I am sad today. Please do not be discouraged. This election campaign is not lost, but is an investment in the future." That future includes Austria's general election in 2 years' time. Dr. Christian Rayner, editor-in-chief of Profil magazine, says Norbert Hofer is a real chance of seizing control of the parliament at that election.
Right now at the polls, the Freedom Party has over 30%, while the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats that are in the government both have only 22%. So the FPÖ would, if nothing happened, be the by far largest party in the next elections.
That a far-right party could be a chance of winning the most seats in Parliament or get within a whisker of seizing the presidency might be a shock to outsiders. But this is the new reality in Europe. Populist nationalistic parties are on the rise. Traditional political allegiances are shattering. Christian Rayner sees this election as symbolic of what's happening across the continent.
Austria just shows, like a laboratory, what is possible. There is nationalism growing everywhere, and especially in Europe. There is xenophobia and governments that don't really know how to handle the refugees and the refugee crisis. Nationalism is growing, and it's the breeding ground for right-wing and right extremist parties.
The new president faces massive challenges. He is a Green left politician, a child of refugees who is pro-immigration, supportive of minorities and in favour of the European Union. He now has to find a way of uniting a country when nearly half the people just voted for a far-right politician who vehemently disagrees with just about everything he stands for.
That package was from Reuters. So much feedback coming in. How about asking a simple question like, where are the fathers who are responsible for the children? The government money comes from taxpayers. Why should my money be spent on people who show no responsibility for their actions and situations? Regard Peter Thompson. Peter, absolutely a valid point of view. And the thing is that I've met these people and they are broken and they're vulnerable, and this woman has 8 children. And so whatever we think about the decisions that have led to her having 8 children, she still has them. So I guess that's the issue we have to address, right? 8 children, meth houses, 8 little poor buggers, and 8 more beneficiaries, no doubt, says someone else, echoing Peter's comments. I hope SIFs have checked out the mother of 8, says someone else. They have, I'm told. Hey, that woman has had 3 housing corp houses that the taxpayer has had to clean up from the use of PE. She's had 8 kids living with her. Can she not do anything in moderation, says Bob. So lots of feedback along those lines. And we do appreciate hearing from you. Do feel free to text us 2101 and email Checkpoint. Another one here. John, emergency housing sums up rich and poor get perfectly. Poor getting poorer through debt to wins while private motel owners get money. As a taxpayer, I don't want these people to pay the money back. I don't want wins propping up subgrade motels. As a society, we're paying twice. Perfect example of the state having to provide the accommodation. Thanks for continuing to focus on this issue. It is so important. Goodness, I read that very poorly. We do appreciate your feedback. And Peter, that does include you. It is complex, isn't it? It's really complex. I've gone on a bit too long about Barack, and I haven't got time for a lovely story about Barack Obama eating noodles in Vietnam with TV host Anthony Bourdain. The meal only cost $6. I met Anthony Bourdain once. Absolutely delightful company. He and Obama would have had a fine time together in Vietnam, forgetting the troubles of the world for a moment. We focus on them on Checkpoint. We will be back tomorrow night. We appreciate your feedback on behalf of our team, and we will now show you a shot of them in the control room. There they are, in the dark. We will be back tomorrow at 5. Thank you for being with us. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New figures show the total amount of debt beneficiaries owe to work and income is more than $400 million, including debt for emergency housing. The Social Development Ministry says it's been working with a woman racking up a debt of $1,000 a week in emergency accommodation with her 8 children. The government will deliver more money for buying crowned land for building houses and for social housing in Thursday's budget. And $2 million worth of methamphetamine has been found in the luggage of a Northland man returning home from a trip to South Africa. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, Turkey's accused of the slaughter of civilians. The US lifts a long-standing embargo